I still remember meeting Tom Selleck in Oahu in the early 1980s, when Magnum PI still had its very first episodes being filmed. Even though I was young, I will never forget one thing. People thought he was the perfect gentleman because he stood there tall, calm, and polite. All you had to do was look at him to understand. When I watched Magnum PI again many years later, I realized that how I felt at the time was correct. In front of the camera, Thomas Magnum doesn't feel like a role being played, but like a real person living their life. John Hillerman, who played Higgins, once said this about his co-star: "He's not acting at all." The irony is that this inability to act almost led to Magnum PI in its first shows to be cancelled. And that was just the start. Few people would guess that Higgins, who is often seen as strict and British, wasn't played by a British actor at all. Not to mention that Tom Selleck's mustache, which started out as a random feature of his face, would become an unintentional 1980s TV icon. We are going to open the darkest and stranger backroom doors of Magnum PI again today. 1980-20. Hey there. Someone who was English but wasn't at all English. When Higgins walked onto the balcony of Robin's Nest, do you remember his deep, steady, and powerful voice? With a glass in his hand, he looked at Magnum with a face that was both rude and lenient. Many watchers were sure after hearing just a few lines of dialogue that this had to be a real English gentleman because he was so perfect. It looked like there was no need to check passports, but there actually was. The actor who played Higgins was not English. His name was John Hillerman. He was born and raised in Texas, USA. He wasn't from a British elite family, didn't go to an English boarding school, and didn't have the London fog essence that the character did. What people think of as Higgins' natural Britishness was actually the result of Hillman's acting skills, language study, and very high level of professional discipline. It took Hillman a lot of time to study how the British talk, including the rhythm of their sentences, where the stress is placed, and even how they usually keep their emotions in check. The British accent Higgins had wasn't over the top, it was so subtle that even people from the UK thought it was him. Many people who were interviewed later said they had thought Higgins was a British star who had been brought to Hollywood. In a strange way, Hillerman suffered from being overshadowed by the part because he was so convincing. Higgins became one of the most famous supporting characters in TV history, but it was hard for John Hillerman to be known as a versatile actor outside of that part. Even so, with Magnum PI he did something very special. He turned an American actor into the perfect Englishman on TV around the world. 19. Magnum PI was cancelled before it even started. If you watch the first few shows of Magnum PI again, you'll see why. You might feel like everything is just right, from the slow pace to Magnum's familiar speech to the way the story unfolds, as if it were always meant to be. In a strange twist, the show used to not have a set time on any broadcast plan. Even though it's hard to believe, Magnum PI was almost over before it even started. The idea for the project came from Glenn A. Larson, who is known for being the director and writer of Battlestar Galactica Buck Rogers in the year 2503. And Knight Rider. Larson made Magnum PI around 1979. For Universal Television, to which ABC was originally sent. But in an effort to boost ratings, ABC not only cancelled Magnum PI but also a number of other Larson shows, such as Battlestar Galactica and the Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries. The miracle they had hoped for did not happen because of the choice. In fact, ABC's numbers dropped so much that it took years for them to get back to normal. Larson then told CBS about the idea for Magnum PI, where the project was finally given the go-ahead. It was a turning point in the history of television. ABC missed out on one of its best chances in the 1980s, while CBS got a famous show. 18. The original idea. The Hawaii edition of James Bond. Does anyone remember how, every time Magnum showed up, the whole frame seemed to breathe Hawaii flower shirts? Strong sunlight. A smile that didn't bother him and a mustache that became his symbol. Because he wasn't trying to be cool, he was the coolest person in the world. Screen Rant says that Thomas Magnum was first thought of as a perfect private detective in the style of James Bond. Men like vodka martinis, tuxedos, and the kind of man who walks into a room and instantly becomes the center of attention. Problem was that if the character had gone in that direction, Magnum would have become an untouchable statue, beautiful but far away, impressive but cold, with little room for the funny clumsiness that keeps people watching season after season. It was Tom Selleck who changed the character's direction when he was cast. Magnum turned into a standard guy who was easy to get along with. He wore Hawaiian shirts and had a thick mustache. making the choice to get ideas from Jim Rockford. The Rockford files show that this wasn't a change that happened by itself, but rather a planned change in character that made him less of a perfect hero. Magnum became a friend you could trust. He was charming, flawed, and rooted in real life. That attitude shows up in everything, even the car choice. Magnum was supposed to drive a Porsche at first, but Porsche wouldn't let Selleck's body be changed, but Ferrari would. There was a very small technical choice that had big psychological effects. Not as a sign of wealth, but as a symbol of the whole series' way of life, the red Ferrari became an image that people closely connected with Magnum. 17. Tom Selleck almost played Indiana Jones, which is why Magnum was really his calling. Remember that raised eyebrow? With a half smile and a quiet look, as if he were asking them directly. Do you accept this? That small thing that Tom Selleck did as his signature look in Magnum PI made people feel like they were always in on the joke with the show. It's funny, though, because that man almost became Indiana Jones. The famous part was cast with Tom Selleck by Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. He even passed the screen test. But Universal stepped in and told Selleck he had to turn down the chance because he had a deal with Magnum PI. At that very moment, the Actors Union went on strike, which slowed down the production of Magnum, creating a bitter Hollywood paradox. Harrison Ford won the part in the end, and his Indiana Jones was strong, brave, and never questioned his own abilities. But it was at that point that people began to realize Selleck might not have been right for that kind of hero. Magnum can't be stopped. He thinks about it, makes fun of himself, and sometimes breaks the fourth wall with just a look. Many people believe in him because he is flawed in some way. Because of this, Tom Selleck's decision not to play Indiana Jones may not have been a loss at all, but rather an important event that made Thomas Magnum possible and helped him become one of the most beloved TV figures of the 1980s. 16. The surprising link to Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. If you've ever thought that Dale from Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers looked a lot like someone you knew, there's a reason for that. Magnum was the main source of the red Hawaiian shirt, the laid-back attitude, and the spirit of adventure. Chip, on the other hand, wears a fedora and a leather jacket that make him look like Indiana Jones. As we already said, Tom Selleck was once considered for the part. Disney made Chip and Dale to be two very different kinds of heroes. One is serious and logical, with the look of old-school action movies, and the other is free-spirited, impulsive, and driven by emotion and instinct. That difference really shows two famous male leads from the 1980s, Indiana Jones and Thomas Magnum. It's not an accident that Dale, who jokes around a lot and seems a little carefree, wears the signature Hawaiian shirt. As a result, Magnum's impact did not end with live-action TV. The picture of Thomas Magnum became so common in pop culture that it can be seen as a code even in animated kids' shows. The Hawaiian shirt, which used to be seen as just holiday wear and a bit sloppy, became a sign of freedom and confidence. And a very American way of being a man in the 1980s. You can now safely point at Dale and say, "See that chipmunk," the next time your kids watch Rescue Rangers on Disney+. He looks like the person who made Hawaiian shirts cool. 15. Making use of the equipment used to film Hawaii Five-0. Do you remember how calm the camera work was in Magnum PI? When Magnum runs across Robin's Nest's yard, it's not like he's in a tense action scene, but like he's in a hurry for something very normal. The wind makes the palm trees stand still. The blue sea in the distance is just a background, and the camera doesn't move very often, letting the Hawaiian space speak for itself. It looks like something from 1980s TV, it's very open and not flashy. It wasn't by accident that you felt like you were really outside. CBS had to make a realistic choice that led to it. From 1968 to 1980, the first Hawaii Five-0 ran for a long time, leaving behind a fully formed production ecosystem on Oahu. Filming gives local crews practice with Hawaii's weather and, most importantly, a way to tell stories that are deeply connected to the state's geography. Instead of letting this great space go to waste, CBS put Magnum PI in the same room, but not to remake Five-0. Instead, they wanted to tell a different story, one that was more personal and everyday, but still based on a production idea that had worked before. Because of this, scenes of Magnum running across the grass, driving his Ferrari along coastal roads, or standing at Robin's Nest and looking out at the sea all came about. This is the reason why Magnum PI did not just use Hawaii as a setting. Hawaii became a regular part of American TV shows because of this. After the 5-0 era, it was quieter and more personal, but Hawaii was still there. 14. One of the first shows to use a shared world. Magnum PI was already doing something that American TV hadn't even thought of yet. It was putting itself in a shared world. It wasn't through big title cards or official statements, it was through characters going back and forth between places that seemed separate from each other. She wrote that Magnum met Jessica Fletcher on Murder, crossed paths with Simon & Simon, and had a CBS-style detective adventure vibe with a number of other shows airing at the same time. This gave the story a rare sense of consistency. The stories weren't just floating around in space, they were part of a shared TV world. One where rules, tone, and even relationships could carry over from one show to the next. This was a small reward for the crowd. You could find the connecting threads that casual watchers might miss if you paid close attention. For Quantum Leap, there was even a plan for Sam Beckett to jump into the part of Thomas Magnum, which was a very risky idea for the time. In the end, the idea did not come to life. But the fact that it was even thought about shows that Magnum PI, the way it told long-form stories, was ahead of its time. Before the term cinematic universe was widely used, Magnum had already been quietly building the first ones on TV. 13. The first theme song was changed. What does Magnum PI? Do you have the theme song in your head right now? In fact, that wasn't the original song. In the pilot show, a jazz song by Ian Fairbairn-Smith was used that was softer and more laid back. Sounds like something you'd hear in a smoky piano bar, not while on the hunt for crooks on Oahu's beaches. The issue was that the music had the right mood but the wrong word choice. Jazz made me feel lazy, nostalgic, and introspective, all of which were perfect for a classic noir private detective. But not to the version of Magnum that CBS wanted to make, which was action-packed, outdoorsy, and full of a very primetime sense of excitement. The pilot's theme just ran out of breath when paired with images of a red Ferrari speeding along, helicopters flying over the ocean, and a main character who was always moving. Because of this, Mike Post and Pete Carpenter were hired because they knew exactly what American TV needs from a theme. They didn't just make background music, they made something that could be recognized right away. People knew right away that they were watching Magnum PI because the rhythm was quick and the melody was catchy and bright. It could also suggest excitement while keeping the character's trademark sense of humor. So, the choice to change the music wasn't just an aesthetic one, it was also a political one. It kept Magnum PI from feeling like a pilot that was still being tested and turned it into a show with a clear personality. Even now, hearing the opening notes can make you think of the 1980s. Magnum's well-known Detroit Tigers cap was more than just an outfit. It was suggested by Tom Selleck, who was born and raised in Detroit and has always loved the Tigers. Selleck didn't want Thomas Magnum to have the polished look that was common for TV cops at the time. Instead, he wanted the character to have a more real and personal look. He brought the old, slightly worn cap that he wore at a casual angle from real life to the big screen. At first, no one in the costume department was very excited. When put next to a red Ferrari and the grandeur of Robin's Nest, a baseball cap seemed too regular, even uncinematic. But it was that difference that helped make Magnum what it was. He wasn't a well-dressed gentleman detective. Instead, he was a former soldier living nicely. He was sometimes a little messy, but he was definitely American. With the Tigers cap on, Magnum looked like a real person, not a figure made up in a meeting. Over time, the cap became so connected to the character that many people remember Magnum first for his beard and that hat, not his gun or Ferrari. It also told a story in the background. Magnum had roots that were rooted in daily life. He had a past, a hometown, and a favorite baseball team. This cap from the Detroit Tigers is now on show at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. That level of importance is rarely reached by TV props. This might be one of the few baseball caps that has gone from the park to the movie set and then straight into the history of pop culture. 11. You think the Ferrari was fast, but it wasn't. Do you remember how you felt every time the red Ferrari came into view? When the theme music started, Magnum smiled and stepped on the gas as he drove along the Oahu coast. Though it seemed like a red line cutting through the air, it was actually much more controlled than that. The Magnum PI Ferrari 308 GTS was a real eye-catcher. Its low-profile, bright red color, targa top, and dancing horse badge made it the dream car of a whole generation. But when they were sold in the US in the early 1980s, new emission rules had a big effect on the models. Many of the cars in the series had V8 engines that put out just over 200 horsepower instead of the around 255 horsepower that they had in European models. It wasn't as strong as it looked, plain and simple. It's interesting that this didn't change Magnum's image much at all. The Ferrari didn't have to be a race car on TV. Not only did it have to look fast and free, but it also had to fit in with the way people imagine living in Hawaii. Having a nice car and solving crimes the way you want to. In fact, a lot of chase scenes were filmed at pretty slow speeds and then sold through camera angles, music, and how the characters reacted. Years later, a Ferrari 308 GTS Quattro Valvo that was in Magnum PI sold for more than $180,000. That was how much it meant to people. It proved a truth that only applies to TV. Sometimes looking fast is more important than being fast. And the audience's memory is what speeds things up the most for the longest time. 10. Hawaii just happened to be there. Do you remember those sunny afternoons when Magnum drives his Ferrari along the coast and complains while the blue ocean and waving palm trees play in the background? It was like there was no crime at all. Even though it's hard to believe, Paradise setting wasn't born from a big artistic idea. The truth is that making Magnum PI was just a sensible choice to live in Hawaii. With Hawaii 5-0 ending after more than 10 years on the air, CBS was facing a problem that many TV shows face. There are already offices, local contracts, tax breaks, and a technical crew ready to go. It would have been foolish to leave them behind. They picked the smartest thing to do instead of moving somewhere else. Keep shooting in Hawaii and base a new show on that location. Hawaii was just a handy background at first. But it quickly became the show's heart. Coastal roads, the estate robin's nest with a view of the Pacific, and the slow pace of life stood in contrast to the number of crimes. All of these things made the environment that Magnum PI. It would not have been as interesting as it is now. It hadn't been moved to San Diego or Los Angeles. What's interesting is that this mistake turned out to be one of the best choices ever made on TV. Hawaii not only made Magnum unique, but it also made people in the US and later around the world dream of a faraway place where a private investigator could solve crimes while wearing a Hawaiian shirt and a baseball cap and watching the sun go down over the ocean. Not having to waste what you already have can lead you to make the best decisions. 9 times, breaking the fourth wall became a sign of who you were. There are some very strange parts of Magnum PI that you will notice if you pay close attention. The background music has not yet started, a line of dialogue just finished. Thomas Magnum then stops for a moment, as if he were thinking about what else he could say. After that, that look shows up. His eyes are not on Higgins or the crime scene. They are fixed on you. In the early 1980s, it was almost rude for the main figure to look at the camera. People thought that breaking the fourth wall was a cheap trick that could easily take people away from the story. Even so, Magnum PI bet on the other side. Those raised eyebrows, half smiles, or looks that ask in a quiet way, "You see how silly this is too?" Set up a straight link between Magnum and the person looking. The important thing is that Magnum never talks to the crowd directly. He doesn't give dramatic speeches. He only talks for a moment. And it is just that limit that makes the gadget work. People aren't told that they're watching a show. They are allowed into the story like a quiet friend sitting in the back seat. Over time, that look became a trademark. It made Magnum different from all the other detectives on TV at the time. It made him seem less serious, less religious, and a lot easier to talk to. You're not just following the story. It's like you're shaking your head and sighing with Magnum. Sometimes you even smile quietly at life. 8 running jokes that kept people coming back. You might still remember how it felt to turn on the TV without first checking the time. As soon as you see Higgins scolding Magnum for something you know, it makes you feel better. Magnum PI did not just keep people reading through its cases, it did things over and over again until they became known. Magnum's least favorite thing about the King Kamehameha Club was always the pickled eggs. Higgins' long, serious war speeches, which most people didn't want to hear, were played over and over. Rick always showed up at the right time to mess up every plan, and TC kept reminding Magnum about the unpaid helicopter bill. Then there were Zeus and Apollo, the 2 Dobermans who didn't need to say anything. Magnum was unhappy and the crowd was laughing just because they were there. It's important to remember that these running jokes were never just for fun. With memory, they made a sense of a world. Every episode didn't start over with anything. Debts were still not paid. Things kept changing in relationships. It became normal to hear the same comments every day. In fact, it was this deliberate repeat that made Magnum PI. It seems more like a family than a crime show. People watched again and again to see how a case would be solved and to see old friends hear old stories again and feel at ease knowing that everything was still going on in this world the same way it did when they left it. 7. If you think back on all 8 seasons of Magnum PI, there is something strange that stands out. There was a lot of shooting and chases, but Magnum rarely killed anyone. Thomas Magnum has almost certainly not killed any people. Actually, Magnum is only known to have directly caused one death in the whole series. And this is not a moment to be happy about. The people who made the movie chose this very carefully. The early 1980s were the height of the steel hero age. In those movies, the more shots the main character took, the stronger he was thought to be. Magnum was not like that, though. He had served in Vietnam and known what real war was like, and the show never forgot that. He didn't want Magnum to kill because he didn't think he could, but because he knew what would happen if he did. Most of the time, Magnum's fights finished with disarming, restraint, or just running away. When violence did happen, it was always taken seriously, never as a way to look cool. The single life Magnum chose was seen as a mental trauma rather than a victory. Magnum was different from other action heroes at the time because of this. He was still tough and ready to take chances, but he never turned into a killer. Magnum PI picked to remember people that holding back is sometimes harder than firing the gun. 6. Robin's nest was real. You may still remember those beautiful afternoons when Magnum would sneak over the fence, run along the stone path, and then disappear behind Robin's nest's iron gates. A place that was both beautiful and very much like home. Many fans saw it as more than just a setting, it was a big part of what the show was all about. Also, Robin's Nest was a real place. Anderson Estate was the real name of the property, which is on the eastern coast of Oahu, Hawaii. The house was built in the 1930s in the classical European style. Earl Anderson, a businessman, used to live there. When the Magnum PI Robin's Nest became one of the most famous houses in American TV history as soon as it was used for shooting. It's interesting that most of the indoor scenes in the show were filmed on soundstages, but the estates outside and overall structure were real. Robin's Nest had a very different feel because of this. It didn't look like a set that was built, instead, it looked like a place that was real and the camera just caught it. Anderson Estate was sold and fully torn down in 2015 to make room for a new development. A lot of fans felt like they had lost a piece of their youth when they heard the news. Although Robin's Nest is no longer there in real life, it is still remembered on TV as the place where Magnum drove his Ferrari home every night and as a reminder that some TV icons can't be erased by time, even if the bricks are gone. 5. One thing that happens behind the scenes that says a lot about Tom Selleck as a person but is rarely talked about is how kind he is to the crew. When Magnum PI's last season started, CBS chose not to give the crew bonuses. This is common in the business, but it's always a letdown. Instead of letting it go without saying anything, Selleck did something that no one asked for or thought would happen. He took money out of his own pocket and wrote checks for $1,000 to every crew member, from the camera operators and lighting techs to the behind-the-scenes workers who no one saw. Selleck wasn't trying to show off, it was just his way of saying thanks to the people who had stood with him in Hawaii for 8 seasons. As a story told with great respect, the act quickly spread through the business. It wasn't done to get attention. The money was more than just money for many team members, it was a way to show appreciation. The people working behind the lights were not unknown. To this day, people remember Tom Selleck not only as Thomas Magnum, but also as one of the last real gentlemen of Hollywood TV. 4. Some scenes of Magnum PI were ahead of their time when they showed PTSD. That looked like a breezy Hawaiian detective show, but the show changes into something very different at night. Magnum is more than just a fun private detective. Having served in Vietnam, he never really left the war behind. This wasn't a mistake.